I'm very perplexed as to why there aren't more people here yet. I'm not sure what's going on with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. The link works. I am unsure, but as people start to trickle in, we're recording, so this will be available on our website. But we can just get started with Chris and with Elizabeth from Unity House and MCOSH. Tell me what that is, Elizabeth.
It's MCOSH, Mid-State Occupational Safety and Health, or Council for Occupational Safety and Health.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you both for joining, and thank you everyone who is viewing this recording. Good afternoon. We so appreciate you taking time to be with us. My name is Gloria Kwaku, Chief Equity Engagement and Grants Officer here at the Community Foundation. And I'm joined with George Ferrari, our CEO. We're
Hello, everyone.
really excited to have you all here for our community listening session. As many of you already know, we have decided not to hold our fall grant cycle this year. And even if we are not holding our official grant cycle, we wanted to create the space to listen to you, our community partners, and hear directly about the work that you're doing, the challenges that you're facing, and the needs that you're seeing in our community. We believe it's super critical to stay connected with the on the ground realities you're experiencing so that we can better understand how to support you and uplift your efforts moving forward. So today will be about listening, sharing, learning, and our goal is to foster an honest collaborative dialogue. So we want this to be a dialogue, we want this to be a discussion, and we want to better understand how to support you and the work that you're doing. So we like to say that we like to go beyond the check, and that is part of what we're doing as far as trust-based philanthropy, going beyond our traditional grant cycles. So we're here to listen. So please don't hesitate to share your thoughts, ideas, and your needs with us. But before we get started, I wanted to say that there is no Tompkins County without you. We know that it's not easy to serve. It's not easy to serve, and yet still you do it. And we thank you and acknowledge you for the important work that you do. So again, I encourage you to speak openly, knowing that your perspectives are deeply valued. But before we get started, George, is there anything that you want to add, share, anything that you want to say?
Sure. A little bit of context setting, maybe, and background. People understand the Community Foundation as a source of grant support. You may not always know or understand that the foundation is comprised of about 160 and 170 and growing individual separate funds. Those funds are very unique and distinct, each among themselves. Many of them are what's known as donor advised funds. That means individual donors have instrumental control over initiating when grants come out of those funds. So when we do a grant cycle where we're seeking grant applications and reviewing them, the bulk of the grants that get awarded from what we call board discretionary dollars. Those are held in a fund. Typically, Tompkins Today and Tomorrow is the fund that makes most of those grants, not all of them. And that fund, we need to raise money every single year to replenish that fund. So we set a budget goal in our budget. Most people don't understand we don't have an establishing gift like is typical for community foundations. And that means we have to raise money just like you do to run your organization. And we also have to raise money for totally discretionary grants. We have found over the last 9 to 12 months that giving is slowing, giving is not moving as well as we'd like, to the point where our original budget estimate for that fund, Tompkins City and Tomorrow, is not going to be met this year. So we front loaded most of our grant making from Tompkins City and Tomorrow Fund into the spring grant cycle and worked hard throughout the first half of the year to determine how we could raise additional money to have a fall grant cycle. We did not get the response we had hoped for and what you had hoped for from individual donors, and that meant we had to cancel the fall grant cycle, something we've never done before. And we hope we don't have to do again, although we are not alone in feeling this pressure among the philanthropic infrastructure. Some of you may know the United Way in Rochester could only fund 17% of the requested amount of grants that they got. Other organizations are also limiting grant cycles and reducing the amount of money with which they make grants. That's not a good sign. It is something I think that is likely to continue for a period of time. I don't know for how long. I hope it's a short period of time. But this is not something we take lightly. This is not something we have intended to do or to seek to do. A middle ground of funding for us is our field of interest funds. Those are not donor advised funds and they're not totally discretionary. So those are things like the Women's Fund, Children and Youth. We have a brand new mental health fund, sustainability fund, et cetera. And all of those are endowed. That means that what's available from those funds with which to make grants are 4% of 20 quarter net average. So when the market goes up and when we get additional money in those funds, more money is available for grant making. When the market goes down, that reduces the amount of money available there. So we are concerned about market performance because of that. So there's a lot of inside mechanics here that we're sharing with you because we want you to understand this is not something we wanted to do, not something we planned on doing, and we understand it is disruptive.
Thank you, George, for providing that that backstory. It's been at the forefront of my mind. We've put it on our website. We've put it on our social media. We've written it in our newsletters. We've sent a few emails. And I should have provided that information before we got started. So thank you, George. Thank you, George, for that. Let me move to our next slide here. Okay. So we have been in conversations with many of you, and we've noticed recurring themes in the issues and the challenges that you're facing. So these include, number one is funding shortages, whether it be a decrease in grant funding or charitable giving from individual donors. People are just not giving the way that they used to, with rising operating costs and the competition for donor dollars. Things are getting tougher. So donor fatigue that you see here on the screen, and also competition for grants, those kind of also, fall under funding shortages. And another big one not listed here is the increased demand for services. We're seeing an increase in demand because prices of everything is going up, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult for families, especially families who live on the margins, to thrive. So they come to you looking for services and support. We know that these challenges are not unique to one specific group or organization, but they're affecting everyone across the county and across many sectors. Some of you are still trying to find your footing from the pandemic, and we also fully recognize that as well. We also know that you are the experts on what's happening in real time. So we look forward to hearing directly from you in just a moment. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about something that we at the Community Foundation is going to be offering. We did start doing some capacity building sessions last year, but with the 3 grant cycles that we had, we weren't really able to perfect it and master it and really focus in on it and do what we wanted it to actually do. The capacity building consultations are an opportunity for us to learn from you on how we can go beyond the grant check and improve our relationship and partnership with you, because we want to be a community partner for you. Very quickly, let's see. Capacity building is your plan A, B, and C. It's your plan to deliver on your mission. That is what capacity building is. So one thing that we will be focusing on during our capacity building sessions are these 8, let's see, 3, 6, 7, 8 areas. From financial management to strategic planning, operational capacity. So you and I will meet, and I'll do an organizational assessment looking at these 8 different areas of your organization. And then based on the score that is provided, looking at how you answer all the questions, we'll decide together your best plan to move forward with how to improve in these 8 separate areas. But that's really not the focus of what we're doing here today. But if you did want to participate in our capacity building sessions, I will include my email in the chat, and that way we can connect, and then we can schedule you for your consultation. So we are going to transition into the heart of today's session, and that's your voices. We want to open up the floor for you to share what you've been seeing, what you've been experiencing. It's your opportunity to tell us, specific encounters you might have had, the challenges, how the landscape has changed for you. So we'll start off. Actually, we'll open it up. So who wants to start? I see Chris smiling over here. So I'm assuming that Chris would like to start us off.
I just have a friendly face, apparently. No, I don't need to start us off, but Unity House is a nonprofit that our official name is Unity House of Cayuga County, but we go by Unity House because really more than half of what we do now is in Tompkins County. So we support people with disabilities, primarily intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have homes, 8 group homes in and around Tompkins County, for example, and also Dayhab. But we also support people with mental illness and also people in recovery from substance use disorder, although that program is only in Cayuga County. We have a great partnership with the Community Foundation of Tompkins County. We've received grants numerous times, most recently $7,500. I think I looked it up. Total giving from Community Foundation over the years is approaching $20,000. So we've worked with the Community Foundation quite a bit, and I think I have a sense that they understand that Unity House is one of the part of the foundation of the community. That's one of our challenges, is because we are based in Auburn, that people don't realize that have such a presence in the county. So I think the grants help us raise our profile in Tompkins County, which is helpful. We also have a great relationship with your colleague, Nancy Masici, who is, she serves on we call it a Plan Giving Advisory Council. It's a group of experts like Nancy, but more of them are like lawyers and financial advisors, to help our donors and other donors in this county, Cayuga County, to help them get started on planning their estates, but also think about plan giving to the charities of their choice. Obviously, we like them to think of us. And of course, Nancy wants them to think of the Community Foundation, which it's all good. It's spreading the good news about the importance of planning for the future and supporting the community through estate planning. So that's a great relationship. We love having her and that relationship we have with her. I don't have any complaints. I mean, I totally sympathize the fact that the Community Foundation wasn't able to make any grants this fall. But boy, how much did you give out this spring? So much money.
Yeah. Chris, you also, if you could speak to, I don't know if people have seen, I think it was in Tompkins Weekly, maybe, there was like, maybe it's at the Good Times, there was an article about the direct support professional challenges. This is a workforce issue as well in terms of compensation. And you're feeling some of these economic forces day in and day out with being able to recruit and retain the folks you need to take care of people.
Yeah, so that story wasn't Tompkins Weekly. My little critique was it focused a little too much on us. I mean, we were happy that it did, but I was encouraging the reporter to get validating sources, and I mentioned some, but she didn't follow through. Anyway, but our problems are not unique. The chart you showed earlier, Gloria, of the challenges we're facing, the only one that the one that rises to the top for us is staffing, and specifically it's because the biggest chunk of our revenue comes from state contracts and state support for people with disabilities, and that money that flows from the state for the work that we do has not kept up with inflation at all, by a lot. It used to be that providing direct support for people with disabilities was a career. Like you could have a whole career, start your job right out of college, and that could be your career for the rest of your life. Today, really, it's still just as difficult, maybe even more difficult in some ways, but pay-wise, it looks like an entry-level job. Just a little bit over minimum wage. And especially, and I'll say this, in Tompkins County, that is especially a challenge. So the state provides funding there's an upstate rate and a downstate rate. Well, so the downstate rate is higher because the cost of living is higher there. But Tompkins County is an island of high cost of living in the rest of upstate. So, you could imagine a system where the state adjusts that formula by the cost of living by county. And in that case, there will be a lot more money coming into Tompkins County to support people with disabilities. What's happening essentially is that, and I think this is the trend is that people who do provide direct support are being forced out of the county, which means that if people want that support, they need to go out of the county. And what does that do? Essentially, it's sort of like pushing all of the people with problems away from Ithaca, which is kind of exclusionary and, well, elitist or whatever you want to say. I mean, it's the wrong effect. It's not what we want for our community, obviously. And so that's something that I wouldn't expect the Tompkins the Community Foundation to be able to fix with money. But as a community, we could, working with our state leaders, and we have great support on this, by the way. Anna Kellis is among the strongest advocates of our work that I'm aware of. We might be able to make some influence, make some changes on the state level. So that's an issue that we're facing. Our vacancy rate, especially among the frontline staffers, is above 1/4. So of all the positions we have, more than 1/4 of them are vacant, which means that people are working more than they should, which means they're getting burned out, which means they're leaving faster, which causes a sort of a negative spiral.
Yeah. And Emily Parker, not to put you on the spot, but I know you've seen similar experiences in a couple of different settings that you've been in terms of your role as development director around generating enough revenue for staffing, right?
Yeah.
And the reimbursement patterns too.
Yes, and I apologize for being late. I was actually at a grant meeting that was running over, so I appreciate your patience. Yeah, I am with Family and Children's Service now. I have been with Alcohol and Drug Council most recently before this, and then Challenge. Chris, nice to see you again. And so I hear a lot of what you're saying in this world. And so the struggles shift a little bit, but I agree with Chris 100% in terms of staffing. In our world, it's healthcare, mental health care. And so insurance reimbursements are not keeping up with the actual cost of providing healthcare. And so it's and private practice for clinicians is more lucrative than working for an organization like ours that provides services for people even if they can't pay. We cover those costs from birth through the whole life cycle. So it's expensive to do. We include psychiatric care, therapy, that sort of thing, and insurance just doesn't keep up with that. So the fact that private practice is more lucrative means that we work with a lot of interns, provide them stipends to learn their trade through Family and Children's. They do well, it's wonderful. But very often after a while, they'll go into private practice. And so we have a lot of transition in that way too, in terms of our staffing. So that consistency and continuity is challenging in the nonprofit world. And I'll say too, in every organization I've worked for locally, Community Foundation has been very significant in terms of funding and understanding where we're coming from, not only in the grant cycles, but in the donor advised fund world. You know, there's a lot of really helpful communication and access. So it's really significant. You know, sometimes we'll have a program that runs a little short, you know, we budgeted, costs overrun, and so a Community Foundation grant can be really priceless in terms of helping us to balance that budget and get that program through for another year. So from my perspective, in many different realms, it's been very important. And I have to say too, since COVID, the communication we have, I know it's happening with United Way, I've experienced with Park Foundation and Triad Foundation, that there's a foundation communication that's happened so that our local foundations understand the collective challenge that human service providers are experiencing. And so it feels good as somebody who's in the human service world to know that the local people who are funding a lot of the work you do are talking to each other, and together they get the big picture and what you're experiencing. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you for that feedback. We do meet local funders. We used to meet quite irregularly before the pandemic. When the pandemic started, we started meeting weekly. We now meet every other week.
Yeah. I remember talking recently at it was a Community Foundation event where I was talking to Michael Ramos from the United Way, and he was saying, you know, we want to hear from you about what's going on, you know, what are the challenges you're facing and how we might be able to sort of shift things or understand better to support that. So that feels really good as an integrated community to
Thank you.
happening.
Appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for that feedback. And thank you, Chris, for sharing all of that information. I've never looked at it that way, that the people with our population with challenges and issues and problems are being pushed outside of Ithaca. That's really interesting. Elizabeth, before you go, is there something you wanted to share or contribute?
Sure. I'll just say that the Community Foundation has been really helpful with our organization. I just started with Mid-State Occupational Safety, the Mid-State Council for Occupational Safety and Health. That's why we just say MCOSH because it's a mouthful. With our Teens Lead at Work program, and in the short time period that I've been with the organization, I have seen that it's been so helpful with making sure that the youth in Tompkins County know their rights and just empowering them. And the teens that are part of our program are so empowered. I'm seeing incredible work that they do. Their leadership skills are developing, their advocacy skills. And so I know that a lot of the teens that go through our program are going to be really impactful in Tompkins County for what they've gone through and how the program works. So I'm so beneficial, and I wish I could hire more teens so that other teens can get that experience. And so that's my challenge is how I can do more of this work so that others will reach that benefit as well.
Yeah.
So, but, yeah.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Because I guess this is a really like small, intimate group, should we just, let's go right into like questions, like Q&A, like what are some questions that you might have for us? I'm also interested in getting some feedback about our application process. We generally go back after every cycle, gather some data and see what works best. I'm super data driven. And I want to, I want our process to be user friendly. I don't want there to be any like ambiguity, something that doesn't make sense. I like to have like, definitions there. So all of that, I think feedback is critical, and it's very important for me as well. So do either of you have any, specific questions, any things you want to talk about? And again, any feedback that you want to share about our application process. And then after that, I'm gonna share with you like our new dates. So we do have our 2025 grant cycle dates, and when that will come out, but we'll start with our discussion. Emily?
I was just going to say, thinking back, the first community foundation grants I applied for were while I was at Challenge, and that is probably a good 10 years ago. And they were more complicated. And, I remember working with Janet Catraccia. She was very helpful, very responsive, and guided me through that, which was wonderful. But there was more work. It was a heavier lift to do that. And I feel now, especially again during COVID, there was a real shift to, rather than project-based, organizational funding, operational funding based support, which was really helpful. It goes where it needs to go. And so I feel like the applications are easier. They make sense to me. And I have to say, I really appreciate the DEI language that goes in, not just to the community foundations, but I'm seeing that almost universally. And I love to be able to bring this back to my leadership team and say, our funders care that we're making progress in this area. It's not just a nice thing, we want to say we do, and it's, a good, healthy thing to do. It's increasingly essential.
Yeah.
And I feel like by funders doing this, you hold us responsible for this. You sort of force us to move the conversation and do more work in a more meaningful way. So that's in addition to the applications. It's actually more work to respond to those questions, especially in the early days when none of us were really doing much of that work. And we had to think, how can we do that? But I appreciate that it's part of the conversation and it's attached in some way to the funding.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my feedback on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You're saying all the things that that we talk about, that George and I have talked about. It was we started asking DEI questions, I think maybe about 3 cycles ago, and it was more or less, are we going to do this? Are we really going to do this? Are they ready for this? And then it just became, well, let's ask the questions and put it out there so organizations can begin having these conversations and understand that later on it's gonna make a difference. And then other applications and other funders are gonna start asking those questions. So let's prime you a little bit and taking it back to your staff or your board again was also really important for us, letting them know that, hey, funders are wanting to see our progress. They want to know how we're moving the needle. So Thank you for that, Emily. You just
Mm.
validated our, you just
You know, and
validated our work.
I have to say, I can't honestly give Community Foundation 100% credit for this, but I think collectively, we now have a director of diversity, equity, and belonging at our organization who really is doing a lot of work, consciousness raising. We
Mhm.
also have a committee that's an anti-oppression committee that
Great.
meets monthly. And we're reading books together and we're having
Nice.
some hard conversations around this. Meaningful change is uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And you have to be sort of held responsible. It has to be in front of you
yeah.
very regularly,
Yeah.
you know, for you to make that shift and think about things differently and operate differently. So anyway, I feel like it, you know, it came from a hard place. It's a shame we have to have these conversations still, but it's wonderful work to be doing, and it's wonderful to be motivated to do that.
Good, great. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Is there any, let's say if there was like one thing that you could improve or change about the process or the application, or the, I don't know, the reviewer, phone calls, conversations, what would that be? How can we be more supportive? Well, you can think about that and then we'll, and then,
I'm trying to think, I mean, I'm right now in the middle of doing a HUD grant, a federal grant, and they are so complicated and hard and
Oh,
all the
they
pieces.
make
of
us look good. They make
yes.
That's what I wanted to say, you know, and and you're really responsive, like if I'm running a bit late with something or I have a question about something, I get an answer quickly. It feels local working with you guys. It feels
Good.
like a community thing
Good.
rather than the state or federal government. So you can't expect to get funding, I think, that's flexible and that's consistently available without putting in some effort. It's really reasonable. I say to people, funders want to know that their money is being used in a way that really serves the community. You have to be prepared to answer some questions and to report out on that. But I don't think both the application or the reports that are required are too cumbersome for the funding. I would have said in the past, it was more of a challenge in that way, but I feel like it's more in line now with what
Good.
we should reasonably expect.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks so much, Emily. Chris, did you have any feedback, any questions that you wanted to ask? I know you must have a burning question, Chris.
No, not a burning question. I'm actually not the best person on your last question is, the process. I'm not the best person to ask because my colleague, Kelly Buck, who you probably all know, has been applying for grants well before I came to Unity House. And as we divided the work, she primarily continues to do that. So she's been the person who has seen the change over time. But we talked about the obvious change in focus in terms of the application process from that project space, how many people, very detailed, where will this be? How many people will it serve? What will be the change in that, these people, how do you measure that? All that stuff to the more, I think you call it trust-based philanthropy, where
Yes, we do.
you say, you're a well-run organization. We know you do good work. We trust you to do the right thing with this money to serve the most people,
Yep.
that it's not going into someone's pocket, and
Right,
that you can demonstrate that it makes a difference. Here you go. And
Yep.
that, I think that does feel local. It does feel trusting, and it's respectful to well-run organizations that have the ability to use the money properly and put it to good work, put it to good use quickly. So
okay.
And also giving you some flexibility, like if you lost funding somewhere else or you had more restrictions, we want you to be able to have it as fungible as possible too.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, So, but as to the nitty gritty of the application and the specific questions,
That would be for Kelly.
so no burning
Yeah.
questions though. I mean, I do hope that you have more success with fundraising. I mean, for your sake and for everyone else's. I don't know. One of the slides I saw earlier, donor fatigue. Proliferation of charities asking for money. I don't know if that's quite true. I don't know if I've seen that, and maybe that's just because my home base is not in Tompkins County, but if there are more charities, they're probably not doing more work collectively. Maybe they're taking each other's pieces of their pies, whatever. I don't know. The donor fatigue question, I feel like is solvable with relationships and messaging.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I think it's not that they're fatigued. I think it's that they just want to know how their money's being used, and they want to be
Yeah.
thanked, and they want to know that their contribution made a difference. And I would say that a lot of nonprofits, especially smaller ones, probably don't have the capacity because they're so focused on their mission.
That's right.
They probably don't have the capacity to manage those relationships the way they could and should, perhaps.
I have a couple of thoughts in that. I'm glad you, excuse me, bring this up. We are in a peculiar community, right? It's 109,000 people, around 22,000 of whom are students. So it's a small population base. It is not a poor community writ large. There's poverty here, and I don't want to overlook that, but there's also wealth here. And there's wealth here that's not engaged in philanthropy. And then it becomes our responsibility to figure out how to engage and talk with folks. And as we're looking at things like the Giving USA report, where giving still is stubbornly stuck at about 2% of GDP, we're not seeing new donors, younger donors coming into the traditional ways of giving. We're seeing more of them giving not to institutions, but to causes and to people directly with GoFundMe kind of campaigns and that sort of thing. So I think we're seeing a lot of people far smarter than I have written and researched much more about this, but I think we're seeing some of that going on here. We also have a very robust mission-driven sector, so there are a lot of opportunities for philanthropic dollars. When we've talked to our major donors this year, more so than any other federal election year, we're hearing people say that reprogramming discretionary dollars that don't need a tax deductible treatment to them, more and more people are not itemizing deductions. They're saying, if I have discretionary money, I'm giving it to a campaign or to a candidate. So perhaps this will change next year. Unsure, don't know. We are seeing more people wanting to see quick results and quick responses to what they're giving in very tangible ways. You could hardly get more conceptual and abstract than a foundation, right? Do you give books to kids? Well, no, not really, but we fund that. Do you provide food to food pantries? Well, no, not really, but we fund that, right? So our work, along with the burden, I think, of having the word foundation in our name, where people think we distribute money, they don't think from where it comes. There's a particular challenge for our fundraising around that. And then you have a lot of donor advised funds, which are very, very important and very valuable, and we love those. But that engages us in a relationship of philanthropic consulting with individual donors, donor by donor by donor, fund by fund by fund, about where and how they might want their philanthropic assets distributed. So it democratizes in some ways philanthropy, but it also cause it to operate on a real granular level, right? If we have that many funds, we have $28 million of net assets. If we had that in one unrestricted fund, we wouldn't be talking about not having a fall grant cycle. So I think those are things that we've heard and that we're thinking about. The generosity report's going to come out soon. I'm concerned about what that will show us. I think more people have distrust of institutions in general, and I think more people have a greater degree of anxiety about all sorts of levels of uncertainty. So those are some of the forces, I think, that are kind of at work. It is our responsibility to address those, but it seems it seems different to me and more challenging than it's been in my 40 years of doing this work. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe I'm getting old and cranky and need to make room for someone else to do it. But it just,
I hear ya.
it feels different.
It does to me too. I would agree with that, George. You know, and I have conversations with people and they have different points of view on
Mhm.
that. But it definitely does feel different. I think there is a distrust that I haven't experienced in previous years about, I think about everything, about information that
Mhm.
comes your way. There's so much more of it.
Mhm.
There's so much that's not necessarily accurate,
Yes.
not necessarily true. Um, and so I think people pull back from that. I do think the election year has a big impact. I think there's profound impact, the most significant or one of the two most significant elections I can think of in my lifetime. And I think people are definitely redirecting in that way. I think there's a challenge, but also an opportunity for people in our fundraising realm to steward differently. The
Mhm.
world is changing, and I don't know what the answer to that is. But I do agree, people need to really feel like the world is overwhelming, and it feels like you get so much information, but it can be so impersonal.
Mhm. Mhm.
You're not feeling that. And so I think philanthropy has to be something more you have a relationship with, that you feel
Mhm.
the value of what you do. I don't take, if I get a gift of $1 from somebody, sometimes it's a very hard-earned dollar, and I appreciate that. I
Yep.
am very
Yep.
grateful in that way. But it's true, there are a lot of small shops who have no development people, and it's hard to have the bandwidth to properly or meaningfully steward donors. So I just, I sometimes feel discouraged by this, but I always feel like when things are changing significantly, there's an opportunity to rethink things and do things differently. And I think that's our challenge right now.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, George. Thank you, Chris. So we have about 15 minutes left. I wanted to share with you the new dates for our, I guess we're calling it summer grant cycle, right, George? What do you want to call
I
it?
don't think we've decided yet, but actually we should ask the question because we are thinking about offering one grant cycle in addition to the library grant cycle, which is its own animal, because we used to offer a spring and a fall, but we're thinking of doing one grant cycle. So we want to get some feedback on that as well, because we know it takes a lot of effort and energy and labor to make an application. So that's one of the things that we want to test with you all. And then whatever we call it, we have to settle on that. Yeah, the ink isn't dry yet.
So we looked at the dates of, other funders, and
Yes.
we wanted to choose a time where there was just not a lot of other things going on. And the dates that kind of made sense was to have an application open and then due, let's see, in May. So the application would be due in mid-May, and that would put you at funding like mid-June. So I guess we wanted to get some feedback on that time frame. What do y'all think?
As far as I'm concerned, I'm tracking grant applications and reports regularly. One cycle for me, actually, as long as the overall funding is consistent, one is easier. So I'd be on board with that. I know it's a shift for everybody, because I know there's some grants that I think Family and Children's in the last few years has typically applied in the fall, for the fall grant cycle. And so, or had plans for, we asked for this in the spring or this in the fall, and when it doesn't happen, it's like this funding for this program that isn't there. But going forward, if it's clearly communicated, this is the one grant application you
Mhm.
will have to submit. There's flexibility in what the funding goes for.
Mhm.
I feel like that would actually make my life easier. I would be in favor of that.
Okay,
I would just
thanks, Emily.
I would just say on a couple different levels, it seems to make sense to me. One level is in one scenario, if you have two grant cycles, you have two big press releases that go out, and each press release is less impressive than one big press release of the entire amount, right? So if you cut the amount that you can give out in a year in half, you have two press releases of
Yeah,
half the
yeah.
amount. And it's like, didn't we just read about this a few months ago? Like you
You,
kind of lose
Chris,
track
I
of
like
it,
you a lot.
you know? Well, I mean, you honestly, your spring grant cycle, I thought it was great. It's a lot of money, and it looks
Mhm.
good. It makes people think, ooh, that community foundation, they are doing some things. And so that's to benefit the community foundation. I feel like multiple news releases, they get lost on people anyway. One big news release once a year is a winner. And it feels good that, hey, I contributed to that. Look how much I'm a part of this thing. But on an individual grant recipient level, I assume that you might have more flexibility with one grant cycle,
Mhm.
that you could give a few larger grants. So, $2,000, $3,000 here and there, all over the place is nice. But are you making, did you make a big impact with that? Whereas with a larger gift at the right place at the right time, you could say, we started because of our grant. This amazing, cool thing just got started, and it's only going to grow, or whatever. You could imagine the communications from your area, from your end, but also from the recipient's perspective. We're so grateful to the Community Foundation. Because of them, we were able to do this big thing. Whereas if you gave
Mhm.
$2,000, there wouldn't be a whole lot you could say. Because of them, we were able to buy a smart TV, and it was great. We got the smart TV and it helped our program, but it was not transformational.
Right.
Right,
And transformational is better than transactional.
absolutely.
And people,
And I
Yes.
would also touch on the capacity element of this for community foundations and ours. If you're
Mhm.
doing one grant cycle, I know you have to have evaluators of the grants. There's a lot of organization and communication that's got to go on with all of that. To have to do it once has got to be easier and more efficient from your point of view. And for us, in terms of writing, gathering the materials, reporting, all of that, we're all struggling with capacity issues, I know. So it feels more efficient use of our time and dollars to do it that way.
Perfect, yes.
less time giving out money means more time raising money, perhaps.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah, these are all great points. And to what you're saying, Emily, thank you for noticing that. So it is a lot of work. These grant cycles, putting them together, recruiting volunteers to do, to be on review teams. And all of the logistics that go into and the communicating that go into that, it is a lot of work. We do offer, I did want to say, and I don't know if Chris and Emily, if you guys know this, but we do offer a ton of different resources during our grant cycle. So we do the drop-in office hours. We do that at Dunkin' Donuts, where applicants can come in and talk about their application. I can, review their responses. I also do the one-on-one consultations where people can, organizations can meet with me one-on-one via Zoom. Same thing, we can talk about the application, I can give them feedback and such. And then we offer grant writing workshops. So we do that before each cycle, and then we do like a Q&A session where I go through the application, the questions, we go through the portal and all of those things. So those are all the resources that we do, and we do it twice, right? Because we do 2 cycles. So with the one
Right.
cycle, again, putting everything together, it would be a more robust, cohesive, we can focus on that one cycle, which makes sense. And Chris, going to what you were talking about, the granting amounts, that was also a discussion that we had at our committee level, and George and I, we did talk about it. But for the first maybe 1 or 2 years, because of the challenges that we had with fundraising, we were talking about just keeping it, the maximum being between like $10,000 and $12,000. And we're looking at all of the information, and again, like, because we're doing it one time, we're not asking our donor advisors twice a year. We'll just be asking them once a year. So, we can assume that they will be, more supportive and willing to give more once a year rather than twice a year. But, for the first maybe 1 or 2 cycles, we might keep it low and then transition slowly into like the larger amounts. Does that make sense? Yeah, because in the beginning, when I first got here, the grant cycle, the range was 500 to like 10,000. So the maximum was $10,000 per grant cycle. And that's, up to $20,000 per year. And what we were seeing was that the larger organizations, those that have the capacity to write outstanding applications, and have someone to actually write those applications, they were getting, $20,000. And then the smaller organizations that, didn't have the capacity, and, had some challenges, were kind of fighting for the smaller amounts. So, 2,000 here, 3,000 here, and that sort of thing. So we got together and we said, okay, how can we, what can we do to mitigate this? And we said, okay, let's come up with the idea that the maximum amount that you can get in 1 year is $10,000. So in the spring, if you get 7, the maximum amount you can get is 3, and that sort of thing. So this is just showing you that we are, we're flexible and we're transitioning, and we want to know what works for everybody, what makes sense. We want to be inclusive. We want it to be equitable, and all of those things. So that's important to get that information out there, is that it's not a perfect process, and we're going to keep trying to get it right, making sure that we are inclusive and equitable, and we are spreading the money out as much as we can. So again, within a few years, hopefully we'll, go from a range of 500 to 20,000. That would be like the goal. But for right now, I know for next year, it's probably going to be between 10 and 12,000, 10 and 12,000, hoping that we can get those smaller amounts, those $2,000 and $3,000 amounts that we were giving, and get those up to the 10, and then eventually grow.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this spring to mind, Gloria, a thing that I have seen Community Foundation do more and more in recent years is in the choice of where they host their gatherings, and through communications, they're highlighting more of these smaller organizations that I
Yes.
didn't even know existed. And I think I've always worked for the bigger organizations, and I want to say, just give us all the money. But I really appreciate what the smaller organizations are trying to do, and your role in making us aware of them and
Yeah.
their work.
Thank you.
So yeah, I don't
Thanks.
take funders for granted. I don't
No,
feel
you
like
don't. We
Community
know you don't.
Foundation's job is to make my, to fund my program. So any support that you are in the position to provide from year to year, I appreciate. And I really see the hard work you're doing to, assess and grow and make changes that are appropriate. So I'm grateful for this session and for your time and your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We're grateful for the partnership with you, because we're
Yes.
together build a culture of philanthropy for our community, and it's something we all work on together, and we always feel very collegial, supported, and encouraged, and recognize and understand what your role is, and hopefully we're adding that value, and we appreciate the feedback as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks
And
so much.
then sidebar, just a quick sidebar, Emily, my committee, the Community Engagement Committee, meets today, right? So we're gonna get an answer to you today, because we gathered more information from you, and then, so we're gonna get a response today.
Great.
So I'll be in touch.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was great to see you too, Chris. I'm glad we were part of this together.
Thanks,
Perfect.
Emily. Good, always good to see you.
All right. Did anyone have any last minute, anything they wanted to say? Chris, I saw you took yourself off of mute.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just building on what Emily said a second ago about spreading the money around, and you said the same thing, making sure that the smaller organizations do get their share, and even if they don't have someone who can manage the process or write an awesome application. I totally get that. Makes a lot of sense. One thing I've seen some organizations do is for the smaller grant amounts, that they're sort of even less of a lift to get the application in. So
Mhm.
it's a simpler, shorter application maybe, and maybe so this is something I'm sure you thought of, but for the higher values, maybe you ask more questions that are, you need, but for the lower values, you make it even simpler. That's just a thought.
We looked at all that too.
Great.
We looked at that as far as reporting. So if you got less than $2,500, there's like less, 1 or 2 questions that you're asked, that sort of thing. And then
Okay.
anything above 2,500, that sort of thing. So we looked into that as well. But it's interesting that you say, so we might do something like that, if that makes sense, for like the smaller, if they are choosing to ask for 2,500 or less, then kind of have like, like a mini application or something. That does make sense. Thank you for that, Chris. That's amazing. All right, well, it is now 1:01. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for those that are watching the recording. Thank you for tuning in with us. And if anyone has any questions, any follow-up, concerns or anything, and this is for Chris and Emily as well, please feel free to email me. I believe you both have my email, but it is gcoicou@cf, like Frank, Tompkins.org. So with that, I'm just going to say good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining, and take good care, everyone.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Have a
All
great
right, bye
day.
now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.